Hi there, it is Dan Kerr's DK Analytics. It is March 4th, 2018. Thanks a lot for tuning in. We have an update today, a video format update. The title of the video is Mr. Hyde Trumps Dr. Jekyll, politically, economically, and financially. The same Donald Trump that has supported the NRA's staunch defense of the Second Amendment, and the Second Amendment itself, has done one of his infamous 180s or 180-degree turns, trashing the NRA and the Bill of Rights in the process. Specifically, on the heels of the tragic shooting here in Florida, on the other side of the peninsula in Parkland, Florida, and the school campus. On the heels of that, Trump has come out and he favors disarming citizens. And I quote, "Take the guns first, go through due process second." Those are, unquote, those are his very words on the topic. In so doing, he has taken direct aim at the hallowed Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, the Fourth Amendment, the right to the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures, and to add further insult to injury, his stance is also threatens the Fifth Amendment, namely, no citizen shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. The Fifth Amendment assures, among other things, that your privacy rights cannot be infringed without a valid warrant issued by a court with the appropriate jurisdiction. Meanwhile, President Trump is demagoguing this issue. How so? Like this. He accused lawmakers a few days ago of being so petrified by the NRA that they have not been willing to even take small steps on gun control. He said, and I quote, "They have great power over you people," Trump said. "They have less power over me," unquote. But wasn't it the NRA? No, but it wasn't the NRA that ignored repeated warnings about the Florida shooter. It was not the NRA, right? It was the FBI and the Broward County Sheriff's Office that were utterly derelict in their duties. If the FBI and local police had been doing their job and acting on the repeated tips in this case over months or even longer, we can be 100% certain that the terrible Parkland, Florida school massacre would have never happened. That's just the truth. But instead of directing his ire at negligent law enforcement, President Trump chose to cast the NRA, which protects millions of law-abiding gun owners, as the enemy. Doesn't smell good. Trump also wants to take a stab at potentially disarming people under the age of 21. Trump told lawmakers that he would give very serious thought to supporting a proposal to lift the age requirement on the purchase of such firearms to 21 years of age. Again, Trump shows his ignorance. Most mass killings, and even BBC is a source here, that has verified the same. Most mass killings in the U.S. are not committed by people under 21 years of age. The average age of the shooters in mass killings has been tabulated at 34 years. To deprive 18, 19, and 20-year-olds, some of which live on farms and actively hunt, and those are also the people, the age group, the constituency, which happens to be on the front line of most wars that America fights, to actively deprive them of their Second Amendment rights to defend themselves is not only unconstitutional, it's a disgrace. Where is the rule of law concerned Dr. Jekyll, President Trump? During the waning months of January, and I'm focusing on the political aspects and we'll go to the economic and financial. During the waning days of January, President Trump presented the outlines of his proposed deal on DACA. DACA means Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, illegal alien childhood arrivals. It offers full amnesty, Trump's proposal. It offers full amnesty with a path to citizenship to 1.8 million illegal aliens, or more than twice the roughly 800,000 sought by rhinos, Republicans in name only, corporatists, and the Democrats. This Mr. Hyde 180-degree turn violates the very campaign promises that carried Trump into office in the first place. Specifically, he promised to swiftly end DACA. It also simultaneously, his action, his proposal, cuts off at the knees ongoing efforts to push back against amnesty for illegal aliens. Yes, we'll say it exactly the way it should be said, including chain migration-based illegal alien immigration. Think about it. Illegal, rule of law violating immigration from the third world gets a big thumbs up, while people seeking to come to the U.S. legally through a very expensive, protracted, multi-year front door process get made total fools of. Just what kind of green light signal does the president's proposal to effectively make 1.8 million illegal alien citizens over time, what kind of signal does this send to would-be third world immigrants and their extended large families about also coming to American shores while availing themselves, once they're here, of free health care, free schooling, and welfare benefits? What kind of further transfer of property rights will this mean to tax-paying American citizens? And to what degree will sustained, outsized, developing world amnesty further inflate the Democratic voter base, threatening to turn the U.S. into a one-party state? For example, California from coast to coast. A one-party state is nothing other than tyranny, communism revisited. And all this under a president, the sometimes Dr. Jekyll, that appoints rule of law abiding judges. His Mr. Hyde 180 here is just pulverizing from a host of perspectives, including economic. Speaking of economic, I'd like to shift to my third point. Donald Trump's double-digit tariff increases on steel, like 25%, aluminum 10%, plus his escalating trade war rhetoric against China, Europe, and anyone else who dares suggest a tit-for-tat response, is sadly indicative of Mr. Hyde's trade illiteracy. This Hooveresque illiteracy threatens the import-dependent U.S. They have a $600 billion trade deficit. And possibly it threatens the world, both economically and financially. We know what happens when we get into Smoot-Hawley type of situations. Before we continue, I think it's worth pointing something out for framing purposes in terms of tariffs. Many of you probably don't know, but it's true that the U.S., at the federal level, of course, already has over 12,000 tariffs in place. So it isn't as if the U.S. is without substantial tariffs. Sadly, Trump's economic, financial, and trade advice comes from cabinet cronies. Cabinet cronies such as the Secretary of Commerce billionaire Wilbur Ross, who made a fortune picking up moribund textile and steel companies at fractions of deteriorating book value prior to the same industries getting U.S. government-based tariff protections, which then resulted in a 10 to 20 to 30-fold or more increase in those companies' respective market caps. Trump depends upon advice from a Goldman Sachs-laced cabinet, 6 or 7 people that have benefited mightily in terms of compensations and options from taxpayer TARP bailouts and Federal Reserve Board assumption of junk assets. Billionaires such as Gary Cohn and multimillionaires such as Steve Mnuchin. I call him Munchkin. And C, Trump's cabinet gives him advice from people such as Elaine Chao over at Transportation, whose husband is none other than the ultimate pork-wielding, deal-making, K-Street networked insider, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who has an utter and complete disdain for the Constitution. There are no free market capitalists in Trump's cabinet. Maybe this is because Trump was a New York City real estate tycoon, where the construction industry is run by an iron-fisted mob. Anyhow, raising tariffs on imported steel by 25% and aluminum by 10%, and God knows what else is in the pipeline, which arguably, as I mentioned, the president has no constitutional authority to do. Only the legislative branch should legislate separation of powers, rule of law, Constitution, Mr. President, good stuff like that. Well, these tariffs comprise a price increase that's going to be paid by the American taxpayer and collected by an ever-expanding federal government. Never mind that the imported aluminum and steel will now raise the price of all U.S.-based steel and aluminum consumption. Wilbur Ross and other crony capitalists will love it. At the same time, it will drive up the price of domestically made Boeings, Caterpillar tractors, Ford trucks, Carrier chillers, GE gas turbines, Maytag washers, Whirlpool fridges, and so on and so forth. Note that some of the above marginal manufacturers, including Whirlpool, are not well suited to this kind of a hit in their cost of goods sold, substantially higher steel and possibly aluminum prices. As such, they may be forced into liquidation or bankruptcy as the tariff is imposed, especially as they won't be able to compete against foreign-made goods imported into the country, their competitive appliance makers, and other people that are on the blink financially, other concerns. They won't be able to compete suddenly against foreign-made goods imported into the country that feature steel, substantial steel and aluminum parts, as those same finished goods won't be hit by a steel or aluminum import tax. To add further insult to injury, and this is before any tit-for-tat response, these tariffs, which could result in a global economic meltdown, okay? That's why this could also be a global disaster. These tariffs will reduce the competitiveness of America's exporters, further endangering high-wage manufacturing/exporting jobs in the already beleaguered manufacturing sector. What an unmitigated disaster this is going to be if it happens for the manufacturing sector as a whole, with the exception of the few industries that get protection, whose profit and loss statements will get a short-term lift, but at the expense of their customers' top lines over time and their own at will. But frankly, my dear Watson, President Trump doesn't appear to give a damn, or is terribly ill-informed. What's the upshot here? More U.S. manufacturers going out of business, less manufacturing. The upshot of these tremendous tariff increases, if they are actually put into place, and others. But the upshot is U.S. manufacturers going out of business, less manufacturing employment, not more, even bigger trade deficits. How so? Thanks to declining export strength. U.S. manufacturers won't be competitive if they have to pass on this kind of an increase in tariffs. And also thanks to less domestic manufacturing. It's a double-edged sword. They'll be less export competitive, and they will be able to make less at home because some of them will go out of business or shrink because they can't handle the higher prices 25%, or that is, they can't handle the higher cost of goods sold associated with a 25% tariff on steel and a 10% tariff on aluminum, and as I said, God knows on what else. In addition, more pressure is going to occur on the U.S. dollar. We're talking about widening trade deficits. As a result, instead of shrinking, the opposite of Donald Trump's mantra repeated again and again, the remanufacturing or the manufacturing ascendancy of America, this is exactly so wrong-footed. It's so tragic. But it will not only result in a pressure on the dollar, a less vibrant U.S. economy, bigger federal deficits, in other words, less output, less people employed, less tax receipts, more tax outlays, benefits paid to those that get thrown out of work. And ultimately, I think it'll even generate higher interest rates as America's insolvency becomes more and more visible, and bond vigilantes, both domestically and around the world, will want to be compensated by higher interest rates, higher premiums for the perpetually growing dollar debasement risks. Politically, this, all said, spells less rule of law, less separation of power, and a likely drubbing at the upcoming election wherein the Republicans could easily lose the House and possibly the Senate, meaning the stage will be set for more socialism, more money printing, less growth, and even lower productivity as the left rips Trump's benefit the rich, quote unquote, inept economic and financial leadership, and touts the need for a return to an Obama-like figure to once again, quote unquote, straighten things out. Much like the rallying cry after another GOP disaster, President George W. Bush's 2 terms ended. What's the upshot here allocation-wise? First, we remain convinced that the budding, perfect political/economic/financial storm juxtaposed against bonds and stocks priced for utter perfection constitutes a huge gift, a huge opportunity for people that are heavily invested or exposed to those very assets. This applies especially within the United States, but to a great degree across the globe. Specifically, our advice is to lighten up materially on overvalued bonds and stocks. Flee into safe cash, treasuries in the United States that don't have interest rate risk, that you can't be bailed in. The government can print the money to pay you. Flee into vital scarcity assets. We've touched on that before. And last but not least, flee at the margin into real money, physical gold and silver held in your possession. And wait for huge bargains in stocks and bonds. High dividend yields, high bond yields will again be here. And remember, we will have reversion well beyond the mean. Not only if history is a guide, but if we look at the absolute mess we're in, politically, economically, and financially. And that way, if you get out of harm's way, you position yourself, as mentioned, strategically. And again, it could happen tomorrow. It could happen in a year. We don't know when. We know the laws of economics, the laws of math suggest that, state that this is a foregone conclusion. So while you get out of Dodge with central bank or bubble gifts and bonds and stocks, you stand by going into safe cash, by buying vital scarcity assets, and also, most especially, by getting into real money, gold and silver. You stand to preserve your purchasing power, your capital. Take advantage of these central bank or gifts, these bubbles. Sell and then possibly even enhance that part of your portfolio and its purchasing power so that you can nibble on with great wealth or intact wealth, stocks and bonds that are trading for a song and have very attractive dividend yields and bond yields. That's it from here. This is Dan Kerr's DK Analytics. It is March 4th, 2018. We hope you find this video constructive food for thought.